Good morning, everyone. How you guys feeling? Welcome to Game On, intersection of sports and business. So, listen, I'm just here to moderate. These two guys are the real stars of the show. Unless you live under a rock, you know what Blake Griffin does. We know what Blake Griffin does. But Daniel, Patricof Co. Enlighten everybody on what you guys do at Patricof.
I appreciate that. So we're Patricof Co. So basically the way to think about us is we are consumer private equity investors. But what makes us a little bit different is our capital comes from both traditional LP sources, allocators, high net worth, family offices. But more importantly, it comes from a roster of leading high-end professional athletes like a Blake. The key to our strategy is taking what we like to think of as a portfolio operations approach to kind of taking the athlete as investor, but really connecting him and her with our portfolio companies in a way that adds sort of meaningful, differentiated value. Basically, what we're trying to do is take the relevance of Blake and the Blakes of the world and really weaponize that into a durable, sustainable, differentiated consumer private equity investing strategy.
Awesome, thank you, Daniel. All right, Blake, let's kick it off with you. How do you leverage your personal brand as a professional athlete in the business world?
I mean, I think being smart about it is really important. Early on, for me, it was about learning. I spent a lot of my off seasons either going to shadow people or meet with people. I remember early on, I got to go sit with Magic Johnson and learn about all the things he did. And to me, any meeting I go into, it's a learning opportunity for off the court. Not having gone to business school, not having been able to do internships in college, we're a little bit behind the eight ball. So I always tell young guys now, like, find what you're interested in. If you don't know for sure, pick a couple things, find mentors, whatever it is, and just start that process. Follow up with people, make friends, and figure it out as you go along. But the most important thing, and the thing I learned early on in my career, was whatever you want to do when you're done with basketball, do not start it when you're done with basketball.
True.
Or any sport for that matter.
True.
We all know the importance of a backup plan, but especially for us, I mean, retirement is for some, if you're very lucky, it's 10 years away. If you're extremely lucky, it's 15, and the average career could be 3 to 4 years. So start as soon as possible.
Like that. Daniel, how can athletes capitalize on their cultural relevance to further their own business and entrepreneurial goals?
That's a good question. So I think the first thing that's worth kind of like establishing is just the cultural relevance of professional athletes is, to us, I think, never greater and is only increasing. Like, to me, it all starts with the athletes. And so it's just a random specific example. So I was reading the paper this morning. Ari, do you know what the most streamed show last year was?
No.
On any platform. So it was Suits.
Oh, yes, right. On Netflix. Yep.
Not knocking Suits. Suits is great. It's old. The last episode of Suits came out 5 years ago. And so Suits, people are spending a lot of time watching it. Great show, whatever. It's not driving the cultural conversation, right? Like it's in a, Friends, I think, was like top 5. Friends came out like 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so I think that what you have with professional athletes and sports in general, and a lot of it has to do with media, the fragmentation of media, the death of sort of linear cable, and frankly sort of the lack of kind of a monoculture, right? But sports breaks through. Mm-hmm. And so if you think about sort of sports and you think about athletes, it was something like, of the 100 live broadcasts last year, top 100, it's like 96 of them are sports related, right? Wow. Like, there is no more culturally relevant kind of category of individuals that's gonna resonate across demographics, whether it's mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, teen, preteen, they're professional athletes. And so I think, like, you'll hear that, so Blake will talk a little bit about what he's doing with production and everything. That makes perfect sense, right? Yeah. Because the relevance of athletes is only increasing. So I think that the first thing is just this recognition that professional athletes have cultural, kind of capital C, cultural relevance way outside of sports. And we have clients going to Paris Fashion Week, we have clients going to Art Basel, we have clients like Blake that are doing their own production companies and getting behind the camera, and so it doesn't stop. But I think the most important thing with athletes is sort of recognizing, A, unbelievably relevant, but B, what is that on-ramp, right? Like how do you actually sort of put that into action, right? How do you go from sort of like potential to actually activating it? And so I think a lot of it comes with access. I think that athletes can get into any room they want, but it's a matter of sort of like thinking about that and sort of like prioritizing that and figuring out, okay, who is sitting courtside, who's sitting in the boxes? Like I'm going to, a city to play a game, like let's meet that team owner. And like slowly and slowly and slowly, you build up your network, and the network that professional athletes are able to build up is really unparalleled. And it's sort of that network and that access and really sort of being proactive about that and capitalizing on that relevance. There's no limit to what one could do. And I think, our platform is very specific, right? We're trying to sort of take that relevance and create this consumer investing strategy, sort of, and it's all powered by that consumer relevance. But there's no limit to what you can point that cannon to, right? And I think it's really more about being just proactive and really capitalizing on the opportunity and relevance that athletes have.
Fantastic, all right. Blake, back to you. Can you share some insight on the challenges and opportunities you've encountered when transitioning from sports to business?
Yeah, I think, like Daniel just said, the ability to get into a room is one thing. And I've made a lot of calls and been fortunate enough to sit with people that I wanted to sit with and I've looked up to in the business world. But at the same time, you still have to bring something to the table. And I think some people are very skeptical of what athletes know, rightfully so in some cases.
Yeah.
So, like he said, going in with a plan, making sure you've done your homework, making sure you know what you're talking about, and putting time in that topic. Whoever you're going to meet, whoever it is, I think is very important. Because a lot of people, like I said, rightfully so, are a little bit skeptical. So making sure you are prepared going into these meetings. When I started our production company, Mortal Media, 2016, my partner and I, Ryan Khalil, made a plan that we weren't going to do any announcements, we weren't going to have any PR. It was just about getting in the room with people, making sure that they understood that this was a passion project and not a vanity project. And I think that went a long way for us. Fortunately, because we had other careers, we were able to do that for 2 or 3 years and then get the ball rolling. And we started this company in 2016. I was 7 years in the league. And we had our first 2 projects come out this past year, one on Apple TV and one on Hulu. So,
that's awesome.
Like I said, planting that flag early, planting that seed early is super important because not everything is just an overnight success. We did a remake to White Men Can't Jump. My first conversation about it was with Kenya Barris, who's a well-known producer. It was 2016. We survived a Disney-Fox merger for 2 years. We survived 2 regime changes at the executive level at Fox. And in May of 2022, we started shooting this movie. And I looked at our head of development, I was like, I can't believe we're actually here.
Yeah, I seen the promo for it.
So, and again, like making sure that you truly love what you're getting into, because in a lot of cases, putting in the time and putting in the effort takes time.
Sure.
If you're not actually passionate about it, if you can't find a spark, then it's going to be a long,
nothing get over
process.
the finish line.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely not. Thanks, Blake. Daniel, does your work with professional athletes provide an investing edge? Would you say so?
I think so. I mean, our firm is based on that premise. But yeah, I think very much so. I mean, if you think about sort of what we do, right? So we're, kind of private, so, we're not public markets, just private, really brand-focused consumer private equity investments is what we're trying to make. And I think that fundamentally, right, there are 2 things that go into having a successful investing strategy. One is your decision-making, and, you have to make the right calls, right? And that's, what most firms are based on is sort of having really smart people make the right calls. But the other thing you need is the opportunity to make those calls, right? In other words, you need a right to win. And I think that, it is, nothing if not getting more competitive, right? Sort of like investing in general, particularly private markets. And everybody needs to have some sustainable edge, ideally, right? There's so many firms that are doing sort of variations on a similar thing. And so I think that, for certain things, leveraging the power of professional athletes can give you that sort of differentiating edge. It doesn't work for everything. It doesn't work if we're doing sort of private credit or industrials or, like there's a billion kind of things it does not work for. But I think for brand-focused private equity, when you sort of tap into kind of the relevance of professional athletes, I do think it creates sort of like a differentiated, sustainable advantage. And I think there's two kind of forms of that. One is winning the deal, and it's sort of when you're meeting with an entrepreneur and he or she is thinking about raising capital, what can you as a firm bring to the table that the other firm cannot? And I think that is sort of like critically important if you're going to play in private markets. And then the other thing is what can you do post-close, right? Like what can you do to positively kind of affect the trajectory of a given investment? And I think for sort of what we do on sort of the consumer brand side, the Blakes and, of the world, like they have an unbelievable ability to kind of alter the trajectory of what they're doing. And if you can take this kind of portfolio operations approach and harness that, right, and sort of like, use that to kind of drive value, I think that it becomes, very, very powerful.
Absolutely. Blake, what are you spending most of your time and energy on?
These days, I'm spending most of my time on the production side. We signed a first look deal with Sony a little under a year ago.
Huge.
So being able to service that contract and bring them a good amount of projects. We signed this deal with Sony, and the writer's strike happened about a month later. So it was kind of perfect timing.
Talk about timing.
But it was great for us. In any situation like that, you just have to pivot and make sure that you're spending your time wisely. So what we did once I got back from the season last year, is I spent a lot of time with the executives at Sony, trying to find out what they want, what's important to them, how things work at Sony. And now, the past like 6 months, I think every week I'm probably taking 9 meetings a week, which doesn't sound like a lot, but
that's a lot.
Somebody that's not used to sitting in a meeting every day, or getting on a Zoom every day and spending an hour and a half in each meeting, it's grueling. So I've definitely learned to appreciate what other people have done or are doing and sort of that grueling aspect of it. And then on the other side, it's just investment stuff. Leaning on Patricof Company and making sure that I'm well informed. Like I said, I didn't get to spend a lot of time learning the ins and outs of business or investing. So making sure that I've done my due diligence on any project that comes across my desk is super important for me. And other than those two things, I'm pretty booked.
Got you. All right. Daniel, how important is authenticity and natural alignment when athletes invest and or get involved with a company?
Yeah, I think the importance of authenticity, it's almost banal to say it's so important, right? It's such a buzzword as it relates to, sort of what we do and sort of getting our sort of talent involved with, with our portfolio or sort of what anybody does, right? Getting kind of involved with a given company. There's like nothing more important than authenticity. I think that sort of now, it also comes a little bit with the, consumers are smart and sophisticated. And if you're going to move the needle with certain consumers, it has to be sort of authentic and the alignment has to be there, sort of like 100%. I also think that professional athletes, right, it's you don't want to do something that's just purely transactional these days, right? Like you want to do something that aligns both with your brand, and professional athletes are unbelievable brands unto themselves. They are businesses, right? They are their own sort of economic engines, but also getting involved in things that really align with their sense of values and align with their sense of ethics and align with their sense of purpose. And I think that consumers, they see that. And so I think it's very, very important. I think the fit needs to be there 100%. And it doesn't work if, I don't know, like I'm sure like there's been opportunities where, somebody is sort of like approaching you or something and it's almost like you're just like a tweet incarnate, right? Or like an Instagram post incarnate, and like it doesn't work like that, right? You need to have that sort of deeper alignment. I also think the alignment, it takes various forms. The one thing that I think with athletes, so athletes know what it is to be in the top 0.00001% in hyper-competitive fields. Like professional athletes know what it is to be truly excellent, and I think that excellence it's transferable. So with the authenticity, with the alignment, you have to sort of think a little bit about, so how can I get professional athletes involved, but on a much deeper, more fundamental level than things that are just sort of transactional, right, than social media or than this. It has to be sort
Right.
of a deeper relationship. And if you want the deeper relationship, it has to be authentic. Otherwise, it's not going to work. It's never going to get off the ground.
Blake, could you highlight a specific lesson or lessons from your sports career that you've applied successfully to business ventures?
I think with sports, I always sort of stood on work ethic. I think work ethic and discipline, no matter what you're doing, is one of the most important things. And in sports, I mean, we are given, you need to work on this, and this. Yeah. In the business world, you have to sort of take some onus on yourself and make sure you are evaluating what you're doing and
Right.
evaluating what you know and what you don't know. I think one of the most important things is to knowing what you don't know, and educating yourself on that. So for me, early on, it was, like I said earlier, it's about finding the right people, making the right connections, learning from those people, and going from there. So I think due diligence is also very important, especially when it comes to investing. I've made some poor decisions.
I think we all have.
On the investment side. I've gotten super lucky on some stuff as well. So, taking a look back and learning from your mistakes, but always keeping sort of a fresh perspective on things. I heard this quote that I love, and I sort of always come back to. It's I wish I didn't know now what I didn't know then. I wish I didn't know now what I didn't know then. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just important to remember, like, you can learn at any point of your career, no matter how much you think you know.
Never stop learning.
No matter how much how much success you've had in any field. I think having a unique perspective and leaning on other people is very important as well.
And with that, all right. Daniel, can you share a case where your strategic advice significantly impacted a client's success in a competitive market?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that's increasingly interesting for athletes is really being proactive as opposed to being reactive, right? So, starting with the athlete himself, figuring out, okay, my interest is this. Let's go find the opportunity, right? Like, so not waiting for that marketing deal or that endorsement deal, but really sort of proactively trying to shape an investment opportunity or company or business or whatever it is, and really sort of drive to get it off the ground. So here's like a random specific example. So one of our clients, we work with JJ Watt, and JJ was married to a professional soccer player and always had an interest in owning an interest in a soccer team. And that's sort of like a nice example of, he had this interest. We helped him sort of diligence a variety of, we started with sort of, women's soccer teams and looking at some, European soccer teams. And eventually we landed on this team Burnley. And Burnley was kind of interesting because it was relegated at the time, but we thought there was almost like an arbitrage opportunity because there was some heat behind Burnley. And, we thought that you almost could pay like a relegated price, but, it would sort of like ascend and be back to the Premier League team. And so we sort of helped JJ sort of, diligence the opportunity. And then we helped JJ raise money, kind of his own like SPV basically, on the back of this investment. And that was kind of really interesting, right? Because we were able to fill it with a variety of, executives and investors and, sort of operators. But that's the kind of thing that I think is really interesting. So as opposed to JJ just making sort of like a, small personal investment in sort of like a random team, it's being proactive, it's finding the right opportunity that aligns with his interest, but it's also realizing this is not going to be his last opportunity, this is not going to be his last investment, it's not going to be his last deal. So how can you take this deal and fundamentally de-risk his future opportunities by having him be his own private equity investor and having him sort of like raise capital on the back of his own personal investment with, relevant people that will stay relevant as he continues to do whatever he does sort of, off the field. So I think it's sort of like a nice example of the kind of opportunities that athletes can shape if they're sort of proactive and, sort of have the right counsel to help them do that.
Gotcha. Like, what trends do you see in the intersection of sports and business, and how do you position yourself to capitalize on them?
I mean, the beauty of sports is I think there's athletes that are interested in so many different fields. There's
Yep.
some guys that love music. There's guys that love fashion.
Yep.
There's a good amount of guys now have started production companies. So again, I think, like I said earlier, it's about finding that passion, finding what it is you want to do. I remember early on the investing side, I remember early on reading an article about Junior Bridgman, who played in the NBA for 10 years, had a good career in his own right, but spent his off seasons, interning or shadowing, and making sure he continued his education off the court. And now, no disrespect to his career, but I think he's more well known for his success after basketball.
That's awesome, yeah.
I think the challenge for us is like I said, our careers can be cut short. They're not going to last as long as everybody else's. So, making sure you're spending your time wisely and finding that thing that you love.
Daniel, how do you tailor your advice to suit the unique challenges and goals of individual athletes?
That's a good question. I think a lot of it, like any kind of client service orientation, has to start with the client and his or her own sort of personal situation as far as age and where they are in their career and interest level, and you need to find the right alignment with whatever it is that he or she is doing. So one of the things that we're doing now, which we probably wouldn't have done 4 or 5 years ago, is really sort of like speaking to like kids that are still in college, right? And I think there's, with NIL and where all that is, but also just the general sort of awareness of professional athletes about the opportunities that they have. We're talking to kids, and they're literally kids, right? 18, 19 years old that have aspirations to, start this business or do this. And that conversation is very, very different than a conversation with the Blakes or, some of our clients that are really kind of at the tail end of their own careers and, have made their money and are sort of, doing something a little bit different. So I think everything just needs to be sort of, personalized. But I think it really comes down to sort of, to hit this buzzword again, about sort of authenticity and authentic alignment, right? Like whatever it is that you are doing as far as counsel or advice, it has to be tailored to this particular situation of a given athlete. And the other thing I think is really important, particularly with our young clients, it's got to start with education, right? It just has to. And so what we want to do is sort of empower our youngest clients to be able to, when they get that business plan or they get that fundraising deck or whatever it is, like, this is how I attack it, right? And I think with a lot of our clients, it's not so much, people think that what we do, a lot of it is sort of a math problem. But what it really is like, it's a language and it's vocabulary. And just getting our clients comfortable with, what is EBITDA, right? What is that, what are these terms that get thrown around sort of liberally, empower them, and ultimately with that empowerment, that's when big, impactful opportunities are able to, kind of come into play.
Makes sense, yeah. So, like, this question is gonna be kind of like some advice for folks out there that's looking to possibly one day do a deal with a professional athlete or do a deal with a celebrity, right? Deal flow. I'm sure like all kinds of deals come your way and all kinds of pitches come your way. What is the biggest red flag, the thing that you see right away that's like, you know what, thanks for being here, but this is not gonna happen? Is there one red flag that stands out every time?
Yeah, early on, I think the words, I want to start a record label, was tough. Or I've got this, I've got this $1 million idea. And I think the thing I learned early on to sort of negate those and to sort of stop them in their tracks is anytime somebody came to me with something, I would say, that's amazing, let me see a business plan. And that alone probably cuts half of those conversations in half.
Gotcha.
And from there, you do lean on people like Daniel at Patricof to sort of vet a company. And once I feel informed on a decision, then I feel much better about making that decision for myself. But there are some awful opportunities out there.
Sure.
So, like I said earlier, doing your due diligence is very important.
Well, part two, the adverse side of that. Is there any one thing that in a pitch or a deck, whatever, that catches you right away that says, wow, you know what, I'm intrigued, I want to dig into this more, Is there any one thing that hooks you?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we invest, and I invest alongside my brother, but I think when we do this, the most important thing is like, it sounds so elementary, but do I believe in this product?
Sure. Okay.
There's sort of three principles. Do I believe in this product? Do I think it can make a difference? And do I believe in the people that are running this company? And you know, if you answer those three questions with a resounding yes, and you feel good about that, then you can take it to that next step and do sort of a deep dive. But I keep saying due diligence, but I can't stress enough to guys, especially younger guys. You know, over the past like 4 or 5 years in the NBA, I think guys are starting to understand that you have to start early on, and that's sort of what I harp on with younger guys is taking the off the court.
Yeah. Is it ever too early to start?
No, I mean the first time my first investment ever was in a company called Hyperice. At the time, you know, they had approached me about doing an endorsement deal for them, and my agent was talking to him, and I was like, you know, I'd love to try to get some equity out of this, and he's like, let's just take the money. And I remember like kind of pushing back on that for the first time. He might tell a different story now, but I remember pushing back at the time, and that is sort of what piqued my interest in investing. It's nice when your first thing is sort of an accidental win, where you don't really know what you're doing, and he took sweat equity and it worked out. But sometimes that's all it takes is like a little win like that, and keep the ball rolling.
Get you going.
Yeah.
I think that's also just the like equity as a concept, right? Like equity, right? Like how can professional athletes and anybody really, but instead of just getting that Gatorade money or sort of whatever, not that there's anything wrong with that, but how do you sort of translate kind of what you can bring as far as relevance and sort of all the rest into equity, whether it's businesses that you were starting, businesses that you're involved in, sort of, you know, taking equity, making the right investments. And really, I think it's ownership. And I think sort of a lot of what we try to do is sort of like to get our clients kind of geared and thinking about, all right, like how do I take fundamentally ownership over what it is that I'm going to get involved in? So, you know, incentives are aligned, I can capture that upside, and you know, everything is authentic and aligned appropriately.
I think we only have a few more minutes, but Daniel, let me kick it back to you real quick. In a rapidly changing business landscape, how do you help athletes plan for the long term while addressing immediate challenges?
That's a good question. I mean, I think with sort of, it's a little bit like the way that anybody should plan for the long term. I think that athlete situation is sort of unique because their financial situation could change on a dime in either direction, right? Like that max deal comes in or the max deal doesn't come in. That is an enormous swing in either direction. But fundamentally, I think that sort of kind of investing 101 is the right answer here. I mean, you know, like nobody is going to regret it if you park all your money in a Vanguard index fund, right? Like, you know, you're going to be fine. So I think a lot of what we do with our clients is, it's not that there's some get rich quick approach. It's not like, you know, you have to do private equity investing or venture, all the rest. The vast majority of your money should be in, you know, regular stocks, bonds, cash, real estate. Start there. And, you know, as it relates to alternatives, dip your toe in the water, build your education kind of, you know, kind of base, build your network, start really slow, but really focus on the boring stuff over a long period of time. That's how you're going to be set for really sort of generations, right?
Gotcha. We're at time, but Blake, one last one for you. Hindsight is 20/20, right? Is there anything that you know now that you wish you had known then that you would have done differently in terms of your process and thinking about getting involved in business?
That's a great question. I think I would have tried to spend more time meeting more people early on. The way I sort of got into production was I love comedy, love everything funny, and the first commercial I ever did, it was like a Subway commercial, and I was staring right down the barrel of this camera, and the director said action, and I delivered my line, and he was like, cut, and he walked in, and he was like, hey, that was great, but try to have fun with it, you know? And I knew how stiff I was, and I didn't feel comfortable, so anytime I wanted to do something, I wanted it to always be funny, and that's sort of how I got into production, because I started wanting to sit in on writing commercials. I wanted to sit in on the whole process of the actual production side.
Gotcha.
And sort of restructured all my endorsement deals to be able to do that. So I think once you find that thing, I wish I'd sort of done that a little bit earlier.
Gotcha.
Started this company a little bit earlier, but there's no replacement for authenticity, like Daniel said. So doing everything on your own time, not feeling rushed, not letting anybody push you into something you don't want to do. Like I said, I've made some poor decisions, and most of the time it was a case in just rushing into something and not being patient enough. So I think patience is definitely one of those things that I wish I'd had a little bit more of earlier on in my career.
Blake, we appreciate that. You guys, we are at time. Please thank our amazing guests, Blake, Daniel. You guys are awesome. Thank you for being a great audience. We hope you enjoy the rest of Global Alts 2024. Thank you so much, you guys. We'll see you around.